Between GoldenEye and License to Kill, there is a 6-year gap. So to this point in the series, this is the longest gap between movies. A lot had happened in between this time frame, but I would argue it's also a blessing in disguise. Most of the films before this, it's like there was 2 years, maybe 3 years.
In the beginning, it was every year, right?
Every year. And then they kind of went to a year in between films. And then, you know, if they changed up a Bond, there might have been an extra year there, here or there. But like, this is the longest gap they've had, is a 6-year gap till this point. So after License to Kill, Eon was already in the works for a third Dalton picture for 1991, which would have had him travel to Hong Kong. The film is possibly going to be titled Property of a Lady.
Property of a Lady.
Which is Fleming's short story that you may remember elements were used in Octopussy.
Property of a Lady.
But according to Dalton, they had finished a script and they were already looking for a director. But a few things led for this not to happen. At one point, United Artists was its own separate company. United Artists made this movie called Heaven's Gate. It did really bad at the box office. It tanked the studio. MGM went in. They ended up buying it. That was the early 80s. So that was in 1981. MGM now owns United Artists by this point. So these last couple movies, MGM was the parent company. Kind of like how today Disney owns all of 20th Century Fox. So anytime you see, it's just now called 20th Century Pictures, that's a Disney production.
Okay. Because for me, if you ask me, I would think that in this 6-year interim, that's when MGM bought it out, because this movie just screams big studio picture.
There's more that happens here. So what happened was this company called Pathé Entertainment, which is not to be confused with Pathé Films in France. It's a French company. They ended up buying MGM. And so they were going to change the name of MGM Pathé Communications or something like that. In the process of doing so, they were like, the new CEO was like, well, I'm going to sell off the distribution rights. In doing so, I'm trying to basically make money back from it. So he's going to sell a bunch of these distribution rights so he can make money. And Dan Jack, which if you guys remember, is Broccoli's company that owns the film rights. They're not the production company. Like Eon's the production company that makes the films. Dan Jack holds the rights for the James Bond franchise. And MGM also has rights. They own the distribution rights at this point. Dan Jack was like, yo, you can't do that because we have an agreement back in 1962 for the distribution rights. Like that violates our contract. So then there was basically this huge legal battle that happened, which is like 5 to 6 years. So between 89 all the way up to 95 or somewhere around that time. So that's the first thing that happens. The second big thing is probably bigger in world history is the Cold War ended. And that's mostly symbolized by the teardown of the Berlin Wall in November of 89, which is, I guess, if I can remember correctly, License to Kill came out, I think, in the summer. So it's sometime in that same year.
Them saying they were going to go to China, that makes sense. If Russia's down, China is a perfect
China's the next thing. So basically, for a lot of people in Hollywood, though, like the Cold War started and popularized the spy genre. So a lot of people were like, why are you still doing Bond if the Cold War is over? But this also, again, laid the foundations for what would become GoldenEye for the story.
You're a sexist, misogynist dinosaur. A relic of the Cold War.
And then finally, after all that dust had settled with the MGM lawsuit, production would again begin on the 17th Bond film. And at this point, Dalton's contract had expired in 93. So they were like, there was a contract that would say, okay, you have to do X number of films between this year, and that would be your contract. But since they hadn't made any movies in that time period, his contract had expired. So they were like, yo, are you going to do this next movie? And he's like, I'm only going to do one. And they really wanted him to come back to do multiple films because it would be weird if he just did 3. So they were like, okay, great, we're going to go with somebody else. And obviously they went back to their original choice before all of this happened. Our favorite Irish Bond, Pierce Brosnan, which we had talked about back in For Your Eyes Only, correct? Yeah. We talked about For Your Eyes Only, and then also in The Living Daylights. We had talked about how he basically became Bond.
He was on the set of For Your Eyes Only with his wife, who would later die of cancer in 91 or something.
Yeah.
And then he was originally supposed to be in The Living Daylights.
Yeah.
And then NBC re-upped on Remington Steele. So just real quick on that, I recently bought the first season of Remington Steele. I've been watching it. And not only do you have an absolute baby-faced Pierce Brosnan, but it's actually a much more interesting premise than I expected. And you'll like this, McCurdy, because you're a progressive feminist.
Okay.
I remember always thinking, oh, Remington Steele, that just sounds like such a stereotype of I assumed it was a spy thing. Remington Steele. It just doesn't that sound as generic as possible? Which kind of goes back to what you told us all in the Dr. No episode about how Ian Fleming wanted the name James Bond because it didn't sound like a spy name at all.
Ian Fleming, when he was writing the story, he came to try to find the name for the character, and he looked up on his bookshelf, and he saw this book, and it was by an ornithologist, and his name was James Bond.
Oh, and that's it, yeah?
It was a real guy. James Bond was this guy, and he just put the name down.
Ornithologist.
Ornithologist, huh?
And then on the opposite end of that, you have Remington Steele. If your name is Remington Steele, you could only be a spy. It sounds ridiculous. Well, it turns out the premise of the show is that there's this female detective who doesn't get any work because nobody hires her because they're thinking she's a chick. I don't want to hire a chick. So she makes up this persona, Remington Steele, and pretends that he's her boss, even though nobody ever sees him. She keeps him all mysterious. He has an office, but he's not real. And then Pierce Brosnan, who's nobody knows, maybe he's a con artist, maybe he's a murderer, maybe he's a thief. In the first episode, he is forced into assuming that persona. And then him and the detective chick, they kind of hit it off to where he just becomes the face of her agency so she can keep solving crimes and he can take all the credit and spend all the money. And go on dates and eat caviar and drink champagne. Like he acts like James Bond, but really he's just a schlub. And so it's actually a really great premise for a show. And then I'm thinking, oh, okay, the whole Remington Steele thing makes sense. It was literally a name that she came up with to sound super spy-like.
It kind of reminds me of North by Northwest, because in that story, it's kind of the same thing. The government comes up with a fake name, and then the main character, played by Cary Grant, gets confused with it, and it's kind of a spy thriller, and it's in a different way. But yeah, that kind of also reminds me of that.
Pierce Brosnan in Remington Steele is obsessed with movies, so he's constantly referencing them, and he'll reference North by Northwest. He'll quote all these movies, and it just lends to him having this weird backstory that nobody knows anything about, but he's probably just a guy who watched too many movies.
Yeah, that sounds cool. I might have to check it out now.
Yeah, I recommend it.
Sounds like some people I know.
Yeah.
Hey!
So, other things that are worth mentioning about this as well is Albert Broccoli wasn't in the best of weather. He wasn't feeling the best. His health was starting to deteriorate. So Michael G. Wilson is now the new producer alongside his daughter, Barbara Broccoli. So you'll notice like they're the main producers on these films, and he is only listed as like a presenting producer. So he's kind of a consultant on this movie. We have new, fresh faces at the helm. The movie is now directed by Martin Campbell, as Charlie had pointed out in the beginning, who is actually the oldest director in the Bond franchise up until this point. He was 62. The previous oldest director was Lewis Gilbert at 59, which I was just like, really?
He was 62 when they filmed this?
He was 62 when they filmed this. And he got his start doing softcore porn like back in the 70s, which I think is just like
definitely came in handy when Xenia was jumping on top of 007.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Xenia throughout this whole film.
Yeah.
You think you can break me?
And then we had Richard Maybaum. We already talked about he had passed away. And Michael G. Wilson was mainly doing producing duties, thank God. And so we have a script now written by Jeffrey Kane and Bruce Feinstein with a story by Michael France.
It's too bad that we didn't have one movie that either only had Wilson or only had Maybaum, because as we pointed out last time, we don't know for certain.
For certain, yeah.
Which one of them is the crazy one who's always throwing in stuff that doesn't make sense, and maybe we'll never know.
Yeah, but again, I think if you look at the fact that Maybaum had written all of the previous Bond films and those
they made sense,
usually made sense, it is only the reason that Wilson was the one who was making very convoluted ideas.
Maybaum's the one who, I think he wrote Goldfinger with somebody else, but he's the one who Goldfinger made great fixes to the novel.
He was the one who quoted for making the fix in Goldfinger, yeah.
So he's the one who said that Goldfinger's going to blow up the gold, not steal it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, yeah. So it's easier to give him the benefit of the doubt than Mr. Wilson.
Mr. Wilson. I hope when Mr. Wilson sees this and he's like, hey, that wasn't me.
Wilson and Broccoli should know that we love them eternally, even if just like these movies. We love these movies. We're here to scrutinize them.
We love them.
But If they're watching, they should comment, like, and subscribe.
They're too busy hitting us with copyright strikes.
Oh my God.
To do that.
These assholes, they keep knowing our secrets.
Put them in the basement.
Yeah, it's not them, it's the lawyers doing their job.
There was a fourth writer named Kevin Wade, who's not credited, but the character played by returning actor Joe Don Baker, a.k.a. CIA liaison Jack Wade, a.k.a. the new Felix.
Wait. Okay, go ahead.
The new Felix was named after Kevin Wade, who was one of the writers for this script.
Jack Wade, CIA.
Yeah.
Do you do any gardening?
You do any gardening?
Next, we have our villain played by Ned Stark, a.k.a. Sean Bean, playing Alec Trevelyan. The character was...
Quick toast, a member of the Fellowship. Cheers to that.
Every time a member of the Fellowship.
God.
We didn't do it for Gimli.
Here,
we
wait.
did.
Hold on, Nance. You'll get your chance. Originally, the character was meant to be more of a mentor of Bond. It was named Augustus Trevelyan, and they wanted either Anthony Hopkins or Alan Rickman. Because remember, Anthony Hopkins had just come off of Silence of the Lambs at this point. Alan Rickman had already come off of Die Hard. He was already pretty big at that point. So they wanted that person for the role, but they instead got Sean Bean. And so they rewrote the role. They changed the name to Alec Trevelyan, made him more of a not a mentor, a colleague.
A peer.
Peer, thank you.
Was he going to betray MI6?
It doesn't say, but I would assume like it's still going to be a betrayal story. And I think it's funny because Mission Impossible
did that with
kind of did the same thing
with help me out with
John Voight.
With John Voight, yeah.
But in that story, John Voight is playing the original character from the television show. Okay. And so it was going to be this, it was a whole other thing. That's a whole other franchise that maybe we should do on this channel. I don't know. So Trevelyan is in this film, creates the Janus Syndicate. That's spelled Janius, right?
No.
In Roman mythology.
Janus.
Is that, okay.
Janus.
Janus.
You threw an I in there for flair.
I thought there was an I in there.
Janus.
Whatever. You're doing your thing, McCurdy. It's fine.
We'll
get you help one day.
Going, bro. Hold on. I need more.
It's gonna be okay. It's gonna be okay.
Come on. I need more alcohol. Give me a second.
While he pours that drink, round of applause for Scott Lorimer returning.
That was a long.
He got out of anger management.
I'm glad you got out of anger management, Scott.
How was it?
A lot of meditation, a lot of planning, convoluted escape.
So in Roman mythology, Janus is the god of duality, which is easy to see because Trevelyan is, he has two identities. He portrays, like you see this version of him as 006, and then obviously he's like the villain of this film.
And then physically, he also has half.
He has two. Yeah, he has half
Two-Face. Two-Face.
He's a Two-Face essentially. Yeah. But what I also found was interesting is Janus is also the god of beginning and endings of conflicts.
Yeah.
Much like the film takes place after the end of the Cold War. Speaking of other roles that were rewritten and actors who played in Charlie's favorite film series, the Russian Minister of Defense was originally intended to be General Pushkin, played by Gimli.
No way.
Yeah. So they wanted him to come back. They wanted John Rhys Davies. They wanted him to come back. But he didn't want to return, so they just rewrote the role to some obscure guy.
That makes that suddenly a light bulb just went off in my head. Any screenwriters out there, please write a movie that takes, because I was just thinking, a movie that has two members of the Fellowship. But screenwriters out there, come up with a script where you could take all the members of the Fellowship, and please hurry before Sir Ian McKellen leaves this earth. All 9 members of the Fellowship and puts them into a movie. Whatever that movie may be, write a script that could attract all 9 of them back to because they all love each other.
Please welcome to Reunited Apart Lord of the Rings edition, the final 2 of the Fellowship, John Rhys Davies and Sean Bean.
Oh, where are they? Oh my God! John, hello. John recently was being mute and frozen.
This much time has passed, nothing has changed. We're all the same. It's fucking amazing.
I love it.
So they'd love an excuse to all get back together 20 years later.
God, Charlie. You're such a fucking fan.
Do that.
You're such a fanboy. Back at MI6, we lost Carolyn Bliss for a different Bond, for a different Moneypenny. Actress Samantha Bond now is the new Moneypenny.
They gave her that role just because of her name. There's so much nepotism in Hollywood. She's a Bond, so she gets the job.
She gets to get the role.
It's BS, man. She's actually pretty amazing, though.
What would I ever do without you?
As far as I can remember, James, you've never had me.
The biggest thing in this film that everybody has to comment about is Judi Dench playing the first and only female M.
I hear the new M is a lady.
A lot of people will say that this was due to MI5's director at the time, Stella Remington. Yeah, that's her name, is Remington. MI5 is a security service in Britain. The closest is like Homeland Security.
And as we talked about previously, there were MI
there
1
were tons
through
of different
20
MIs.
or something, and then over time they kind of consolidated into just a few.
And it was Ministry of Intelligence Sector 6, Sector 5. So there was all these different sectors.
Yeah.
Consolidated. MI5 and MI6 are the main two that are still left to this day. She had a striking resemblance to Judi Dench from this time period. So if you look at photos from them, they kind of look like you can see where the costume was like, we're going to make you look like Stella here. That's kind of where they went with the character.